It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a part of your workday. And a big shout out to everybody also listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. Welcome to Agronomic Monday here today on the first day of the week. Lots to talk about as, well, in some places harvest kind of wraps up, and in others just kind of really getting humming with some of those corn and soybeans in the east side of the country, but still lots to chat about, lots to talk about as we complete the 23 crop year and start to think about 2024 already, of course. So looking forward to today's chat. We'll be joined by Peter Wheat Pete Johnson today, the host of Wheat Pete's Word, the podcast where a new episode drops every single Wednesday, wherever you get your podcast. So Pete will be here. We got a lot of ground to cover with him. I know one of the things he wanted to actually talk about last week, Gibberella in the corn and getting that off the field that corn off the field as quickly as possible. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more. We're also going to hear today from independent agronomist Pat Lynch to kind of talk about maybe it's the rejuvenation or maybe some increased new interest in broadcasting fertilizer and some of the technologies that some of these broadcast units have now that are, I remember when I was a kid, one of my jobs in the farm was to go pick up the broadcaster. We would broadcast urea. And, that spreader that I was picking up from the local wheat pool at the time, that is not the spreader of today with some of the companies that are manufacturing them. We're going to hear from Pat Lynch on that today. And I want some of your feedback on that as well. We're also going to, now I promised last week and I didn't come through on it, which was your feedback. And so I have made room today for us to finally get to some of your feedback. So we're going to do that at the back end of the show. Not going to do news today. We're going to get to your listener feedback. We got, I think, a couple calls to the listener line. We got some emails, some texts, and we'll get to all of that here today as well. Speaking of feedback, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the different social media platforms. We are Real Agriculture across all of those social media channels. Or you can call the RealAg listener line. It's really simple. You just dial the number 855-776-6147. You press the number 3 and you leave me a message. So I encourage you to do that as well. We'll always want to get more calls to that RealAg listener line. So you're not bothering me. I want your feedback. I want to hear from you. What's your position? Do you agree, disagree? Where do you think some of the holes are? And any of the topics that we are discussing here on a daily basis. Make sure you check out the Agronomist tonight. That is at 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain on Monday night at realagriculture.com/live or on the Real Agriculture YouTube channel. We will be live starting in, 8 o'clock, like I said, in the Eastern time zone. And it is Real Ag in prime time. Tonight, Lindsay is focusing in on soil sampling. That's right. So soil sampling for nitrogen and phosphorus. We are in the fall, important topic. And she's got an expert from the West, somebody from Silvite, and she has, that's from the East. And the Western representative, I believe, is Jason Vogt out of Manitoba. He's like awesome. He is great when it comes to agronomic topics. So it's going to be a great show here tonight. So make sure you remember to check that out. Even if you're in the combine, you're rolling through the field, put it on your phone, right? You could listen to it and participate in the live chat while the show is live because it is a live stream, which really makes it unique from that standpoint. Also going on right now, of course, I feel like it's one of the things I love about fall is the fact that we're getting in those pennant chases in baseball. And boy, the Blue Jays have really turned the season around, looking a lot better, especially with Texas and Seattle are having to play each other. So that's kind of, there's going to be losses that come out of that. The Blue Jays look like they're going to be making the playoffs. I don't want to jinx it in this last week of the regular season. And, one of the things I love so much is one playoff baseball, but especially baseball on the radio. And it comes at a time where a lot of people are out in the tractor doing fall work, or they're, maybe doing some spraying, or they're combining, of course, driving the grain truck, all of those things. And it sort of sparks sort of like nostalgia in me. And, do you do that? I think a lot of you probably do. It's really a great time of the year, and hopefully the Blue Jays can make us all put big smiles on our face and have a bit of a real playoff run here, more so than we have seen the past number of years. And if you look back to where we were 2 months ago, we're sure looking a lot better than we were then. That is for sure. Okay, let's get to Agronomic Monday. Let's take a break, and we'll bring in Peter Pete Johnson. We'll get to it. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147. It's now time for a product spotlight with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. We're joined right now by Dave Gallant. Dave, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the cash advance from CCGA, give us a bit of a brief overview on the program and how it really works to help farmers.
It gives them access to cash flow for their inventory before they have to sell that inventory. There's no fee, and farmers have access to $350,000 interest-free and another $650,000 at prime minus 0.75% on over 55 different products. So it really assists farmers with their working capital needs, especially now in the fall. And lastly, farmers only have to pay a cash advance as they sell the product, so there's no monthly or quarterly payments required, which means they only pay when they have cash flow from a sale. Farmers can apply right now. If they're not an existing customer, they simply call us at 1-866-745-2256.
Looking for robust, reliable grain storage solutions? AGI leads the industry in quality, innovation, and offerings to protect your investment. Designed for exceptional cleanout, superior strength, and unbeatable versatility, you can rest easy knowing your grain is secure in an AGI West Steel bin. With 100 years of manufacturing experience, AGI West Steel bins will exceed your expectations for reliable storage. AGI West Steel. Long-term safe storage. Find AGI at your local dealer.
Let's get rolling here with Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio. But first, do you want true nitrogen protection? Skip imitator products for an agronomically effective solution like Super U Premium Fertilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. Super U protects against all three forms of loss and is proven to boost yield potential. See how others stack up at defendyourn.ca. Let's bring him in. It is Peter Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going fine, Sean, but it could go better if the weather forecast was for 2 weeks of sunny weather. We were going to get lots of harvest done, lots of wheat planting. Sugar, get up this morning and there's the next 4 days are crappy in the forecast. Been a few showers around this morning, and it's late September. I want that wheat planted, and we're not quite making the headway that I'd like to make.
How is some of this change in weather going to impact how that corn finishes?
So far, no frost, and we would like more sunshine, absolutely. But remember that in corn, there's a lot of remobilization out of the stalk at this time of year. So even when we don't get as much sunshine as we would like, we're still going to mature the corn. We might not get quite as heavy a kernel weight as we'd like. We'd really like heavy kernels to just power the yield. So we might give up a little bit with these cloudy days. It has been amazing how much cloud we have had over the last little period. And Saturday was a gorgeous day, sunny and beautiful. And you just say, yeah, give me 2 more weeks of this. And we'd get more corn yield. We'd get soybeans coming off. We'd get more wheat planted. Just not the way Mother Nature wants to keep dealing the cards.
Mm. You mentioned planting of wheat. Now we've got growers across the country that, typically plant winter wheat, or maybe you're thinking about it, and some dealing with some drier conditions. And so one of the questions that pops up all the time is how deep can I actually plant this wheat before I'm chasing moisture, but maybe I'm hurting myself a little bit? What are your thoughts on that maximum depth that you could go to?
Shaun, it astounds me that we could go from the amount of rain we had in July in parts of Ontario to a fairly normal kind of August to now September is just super dry. And some growers are telling me they can't find moisture until they get to 4 inches deep.
Ooh, it sounds like they're farming in Western Canada.
Exactly. No, it's just, how can that be? And it depends on soil type and just where you're located. It is funny that we're not getting many real soaking rains right now. The rains that we are getting are just little light showers. And so we're not getting a lot of moisture to replenish that topsoil, that 2 or 3 inches at the top in order to plant into moisture. It's just little stinky showers that wreck harvest and make you mad and make the residue wet. So when you try to plant the wheat through it, it doesn't cut well. But as far as how deep do you go, if you can find moisture up to 3 inches deep, plant 3 inches deep. If it's over 3 inches deep, it really, the wheat coleoptile will not extend that long. And so then the first internode has to extend. And when those plants, they'll emerge. We planted them 6 inches deep. They will come up, but they get really, really weak. Plus, most drills won't put it over 3 inches anyway. They simply aren't designed to do that. Dry soil tends to be tough soil. So it gets really hard to get more than 3 inches deep. If you're over 3 inches, I generally say, no, just plant it at 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches, and let it wait for the rain. It will rain. We're Ontario. It's going to rain. But the question is when.
Okay, so what about out west? Because, less confidence it's going to rain, at least when you want it to, for the most part. When you go that deep, aren't you in danger of, maybe you're in moisture or you're around the moisture and that seed has potential to germinate, but can it not get stranded? Where it kind of gets in no man's land there of some real dry sort of material, or does that not matter off the top?
Well, if you go to 3 inches deep and you're in moisture, then remember, wheat's not corn and not soybeans. It doesn't need as much moisture to get it up out of the ground. It has a fairly low moisture requirement. If you can get it even on top of moisture. With soybeans, you plant them on top of moisture, it's all bad because they'll swell up and the moisture will run away from them and they're done. With wheat, even high humidity will be enough moisture to get it to germinate and grow. So as long as there is moisture there, you plant 3 inches deep. Yeah, it will take more. It takes 50 growing degree days for every inch deeper that you plant it. So it's going to be slower, and under cool Western conditions, it might be a lot slower, which would be a concern with winter wheat in terms of, is it going to survive the winter? Does it get up quickly enough? But the challenge, the one negative of planting that 3 inches deep is that the next day you get a 3-inch thunderstorm and it packs that soil tight. And now that plant's it's got to fight through a lot of dirt that's compacted and tight above it. And it just, sometimes it can really lose vigor in doing that. But if it's a dry forecast and you can find moisture, plant to moisture up to 3 inches. If there's no moisture, yeah, you just gotta hope for rain.
Big fingers crossed.
Yeah, always. Whenever it comes to weather, it's always big fingers crossed, Shaun. Just doesn't matter what.
Yeah, exactly. I know out here in southern Alberta, we got a lot of growers preparing for corn silage, and same thing out in Ontario. Corn silage has begun. What's your thought on cutting height of that silage when we're looking at the corn crop?
Oh yeah, Shaun, what a hot button that has become on the word. Oh my gosh. So it's really interesting. So, first off, if I was in Western Canada, Shaun, and I was short feed, I'm cutting that corn silage as close to the ground as I possibly can. Just shave the ground because I need every bit of feed I can get. The opposite is true here in Ontario right now. We've got corn that's 12 feet high. We're at silage. Silage harvest really started in earnest on Saturday in a lot of areas. So we're just at the front end. There's a few people that have been earlier than that. But, we're talking 28, 30 ton silage. And so in that situation, if you're long feed, you've got all sorts of feed, you're not worried about running out of feed, then as you increase that cutting height, you decrease the digestibility, you increase the digestibility. So you get higher digestibility because that bottom portion of the stalk is less digestible. And you also increase your starch content because your cob ratio to the stover is higher because you're leaving more of that stover in the field. So if you want better quality feed, you cut higher. But you can only do that if you are long feed and you're going to be able to fill the bunker and whatever else you need to do. And the other, Abram, I had a great chat with Abram on Saturday, and he said, Pete, tell them all to cut it close to the ground, and then you'll have more acres left to harvest for grain corn, and you can sell the grain corn. And I mean, if you're feeding beef cattle, maybe that works. If you're feeding dairy cows, though, the quality of the feed and the value of the milk is just so important that better digestibility, that higher starch drives you to cut that plant higher and get better quality feed, get more milk out of the cow if you can at all. But you got to have enough feed, full stop.
Yeah, as I'm driving around the countryside yesterday, and I'm in a pretty drought-stricken area, and one of the things I've noticed is that as you're driving around, you see how low some of the stubble is cut, and at first thought, you're like, man, why are we like, we got no, it's like sort of this vicious circle. We don't have any chance of a snow capture because we have no stubble, but we were forced to cut that low in some cases because that's where the crop was at. And so it's sort of, I kind of had this like, oh man, this is a vicious circle you just can't get out of until it really starts to rain here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's why we'd like to use stripper heads if we could when we harvest wheat, because you get taller stubble, you trap more snow. If you could, with your corn silage, you'd cut it higher to trap more snow, although in 30-inch rows and at 30,000 plants, they're going to trap quite a bit less than a wheat crop, right? Because there's so much more residue to a wheat crop. But yeah, it is a vicious circle when you're that dry and in a dry zone. I
know I've asked you this before. Why do you think we don't see more stripper headers? Because we talk about all the benefits, we hear some of the good stories. I know of a few people that are using them. Why are they so few and far between? It's a really good question, Shaun. And maybe it's because there's not enough competition or innovation in that realm of agriculture. Like there's not many manufacturers that make stripper headers, and some growers have trouble getting the stripper header to do a good job of harvesting all the grain. Like there's a bit more header loss, and they simply don't want to see that. I'm pretty sure we could rectify that, and it's not a big deal. The people that have learned how to use stripper headers absolutely love them, would never go back. They leave taller stubble. There's no worry with residue spread. You know how often I whine about proper residue spread behind the combine? You go to a stripper head, man, all you've got is the chaff, and maybe you don't get the chaff perfect, but that's what, 5% of the residue. The other 95% of the residue is sitting right where it was attached to the soil. So it's a perfect residue spread. It just seems that there's a learning curve there. I'm actually going to go to South Dakota in January, as if that's a real perk. Wow.
Right?
Wow. Good for you.
Yeah. Gettysburg in South Dakota in January. But there's a core group of growers down there. I've been down a few times, and they use stripper headers. They've figured them out, and they love them, and they don't get any more loss through the combine than with a standard header. So I just think that the stripper headers are not mainline, and because they're not mainline, they tend not to get promoted as much. And when they're not promoted as much, maybe not as much innovation, and it's like your snowball with the drought, right? You can't leave that residue. Maybe we don't have that critical mass in stripper headers.
Like, is there a stripper header that is the right size to go on like an X9? Like, do you know what I mean?
So that's man. I bet you they'd make one. I'd actually have to look how wide they make them. But with stripper headers, you can really fly, right? You can go a lot faster because you're not putting all that stuff through. So the other challenge with a stripper header, Shaun, is that you actually have to modify the combine, because in a normal combine, all that grain is in the straw, and as it goes back to rotor, it's getting spun out. If it back to walkers, it's getting dropped out. With a stripper header, it almost all drops right at the start. And a lot of combines don't have the capacity to take that much grain right at the start of the shaker pan or the augers that bring it back onto the sieves. So there's some other modifications you got to do to make that work. And is there one for an X9? That's a great question. I don't know that answer.
Yeah. Anybody in the audience, if you've been using a stripper header and you want to talk about combine modifications you've had to make, or is there a certain model or brand type that you feel is better for that application, please let us know. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Final point on this, Pete. I think what ends up happening a lot is it's not maybe using the stripper header that's the problem. I think it's people not adjusting or having a plan for the following spring with all the extra stubble and material there. I think that's sort of probably the mind block for a lot of people. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need residue to trap snow in Western Canada, but then it keeps the ground cooler and damper next spring. Yep. So it's higher yields, but it's also more headaches at planting time.
Can we get to take a break? Yeah, sorry. We got to take a break, Pete. You're listening to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. We'll be right back right after this.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
You know, there's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
Introducing the all-new Xerion 12 Series tractor by Claas. Redesigned from the ground up to redefine the high-capacity four-wheel drive market. With 653 max horsepower, industry-leading hydraulic flow, a silky smooth CVT, a powerful TerraTrack undercarriage, and a quiet, comfortable cab with 20% more legroom. More than just power. The all-new Xerion by Claas.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. Shaun Haney, your host, joined by Peter Wheat Pete Johnson. Okay, Pete, before we move on to Gibberella, I know that you love power. Is that correct?
Well, absolutely. Who doesn't? Right?
Yeah.
Testosterone tillage. Get that black smoke pouring, baby.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the all-new Claas Xerion 12 Series tractor. They're redesigned from the ground up to redefine the high-capacity four-wheel drive market. And here's the best part, Pete. For those of you who need more than just power, so there's actually other stuff too to get excited about, visit Claas.com. That is CLAAS.com. Look up the Claas Xerion 12. Okay, let's continue on here with our agronomic discussion this afternoon on this Monday. Pete, Gibberella in the corn, we're finding it. How severe is it?
So, Shaun, it's not a disaster, but there's more in the crop than we'd like to see, and it's just developing. So for goodness sakes, for anybody listening, as soon as you can get that corn crop out of the field, go harvest. it is astounding. Even with silage, one of the things they've really found with silage, you want to leave that crop until you get as much starch in the kernel as you can. It used to always be half milk line. Now they're sort of pushing towards 3/4 milk line, run it through a kernel processor, get more starch into that kernel because that's where the energy comes from. But if you get caught doing that, and now there's rain and you can't get into the field for 10 days, the toxins, and it's not just Gib, it's not just the Dawn toxin coming from Gibberella, but it's what they refer to as a toxic soup. So there's, 6, 7, 8 different toxins that they start looking at in silage. And it definitely impacts the quality of the silage going through the dairy cow. We always used to think, ruminants and toxins don't really matter. They matter to high producing dairy cows. They probably don't matter to the old beef cows out there, that all they're supposed to do is produce another calf next year. But if you want a lot of milk or you want to really make those cattle gain fast, then those toxins matter. And in the corn crop, so it's a really interesting scenario this year, Shaun, because we had the weather. We were expecting Gib. Although with the weather that we had in July, you almost would have, and early August, you almost would have said it's going to be a disaster. But a lot of growers spray, and that's a good thing on a year like this. And it's funny that oftentimes on the years where we expect a disaster, we're fortunate it doesn't happen. And go back to 2018, we kind of thought, there shouldn't be a problem. That was the disaster year. So it's almost like humidity is as important or more important than actual rainfall, which is twist your brain sideways, because we know we need the rainfall to get the silly fungus to sporulate in the soil. This year, I can walk into fields, and so a couple things going on this year. Like we had really outstanding weather conditions. As I said, 12-foot tall corn, lots of corn tried to make 2 cobs. And in most fields, the second cob aborts. In some fields, we had plants that silked and looked like it was going to make 5 cobs. We had a lot of plants that had the main cob and another sucker cob right on the same node as the main cob. Most of those all aborted, but not all. And so I don't know what it is. In some fields, it might be 10% of the plants that have this stupid second cob on it. And as soon as you have that second cob, it doesn't pollinate to the tip. The plant doesn't have enough resources to make that a big cob. Now the husk isn't forced open. Where we're seeing less Gib is where the husk is opening up. And a lot of companies now, from a Gib standpoint, are looking at how tight that husk wraps around the ear. And they know if it doesn't loosen off, that it's a Gib potential. Those second cobs, they're a problem area. And when I walked, I'm astounded because I can pick the cobs out without even opening them up. And I'm, at least 80% right, just based on, is the husk alive and open? And if that's the case, there won't be much Gib in that ear at all. There might be one kernel started, or if the other thing is Western bean cutworm, anywhere we're getting cob damage, we're seeing some Gib develop. But if you just look at that cob and the husk looks dead, and I'm not sure why that husk looks more dead. It's almost like the Gib is killing the husk as well, because the husk on the good ears is still green. But you look at, that looks prematurely dead, and it's tight at the top of the cob. And you open that up, and 8 times out of 10, 4 times out of 5, you're going to find some Gib in that cob. And it's not, it's just starting now, but that's where the early harvest comes into place, because the longer that stays like that, the more it's going to move down the cob and affect more and more kernels, create more and more toxin.
Makes sense. Hey, Pete, I want to ask you about something that I'm not going to call it a phenomenon, because that's way too hyperbolic. But when I was talking to Neil Townsend from Grain Fox last week, we were talking about where some of the Western Canadian yields are. Now, this is, once again, broad brush stroke. But anecdotally, as I've had farmers on the Farmer Rapid Fire the past number of weeks, there's a bit of a common thread where's your yield to your expectation? Not where's your yield to the record or anything like that, because we know that, there in certain parts, specifically Alberta, southwestern Saskatchewan, not a lot of rain. Okay. So crop yield's not optimal, but where are they to your expectation going into harvest? And what we have heard a lot, and Neil and I talked about this, they're actually at or above. I haven't heard a lot of, it's actually worse than I thought. Now, some of that is probably out there. So yes, full stop. But just anecdotally, randomly, the farmers we've been talking to in the rapid fire, they're not exactly handpicked for who's going to tell the best story kind of thing. It's pretty random when they're those show lists are put together. That's what we've been hearing. And so I'm curious from an agronomic standpoint, is there a why to that? Is it the genetics? Is it just that we're more pessimistic as farmers? What is it?
Yeah, so Shaun, I think there's a whole lot of factors there, and genetics are one. There's no question. Particularly, you look at corn, the amount of stress tolerance we've bred into the corn crop is phenomenal. We haven't maybe built quite as much stress tolerance into wheat or soybeans, but we're working on it. So genetics is one thing, but the other thing, and don't get me wrong, higher carbon dioxide levels globally is a huge negative. And you get into the warmer climates, man, like it's not a good news story. But one of the things about higher carbon dioxide levels, particularly with C3 crops, so wheat, barley, oats, soybeans, corn is a C4. So corn is a different beast. But oftentimes those C3 crops are limited by the amount of carbon dioxide they can get into the plant under drought conditions, because the stomates are closed in the day. We can't get the carbon dioxide into the plant. If you have higher carbon dioxide levels, they become more drought tolerant. And so with less moisture, they can still yield a bit better than we expected that they could. So I think, and to be honest, Shaun, when I look at the yields we're getting in Ontario, and yeah, genetics are better. Yeah, wheat peat pushes people, better agronomy. But at the end of the day, we're not doing that much different. And yet the yields continue to get higher and higher and higher. And so there's some other factors out there, and carbon dioxide levels and solar brightening is the other thing that, this year with all the smoke, I kind of got to back off the solar brightening thing, and we'll wait and see where yields shake out. But I think that's part of what's going on, is that higher carbon dioxide level, as much as it has negative consequences. And there's lots, we could talk about that for 4 or 5 RealAg Radio sessions, but from a cropping standpoint, C3 crops, it makes them more drought tolerant.
Yeah. And one of the other interesting pieces with this is we've heard a lot about variability, right? And not just variability, like, farm here and then 5 miles over, it's a totally different story. That exists, but we're talking about variability within the field, which I think makes it very, very difficult to predict what that production number is going to be on the canola crop. We really have to wait for it to hit the bin. But what I've heard from a lot of farmers when it comes to some of their cereals is like, man, there was a lot of variability. But as I was rolling through the field, I was watching the monitor, I was actually surprised what areas where I thought, not very good, they actually were, again, above those expectations. So it's sort of in some ways, it's a little bit of, I don't know if it's a shift in mindset, but it's sort of a challenge we still got a ways to go in trying to accurately predict what a field, given the conditions, what that field will actually do. We're never going to have it perfect, but I think it again shows it's kind of challenging.
Yeah, no, it happened in Ontario, super dry through our wheat grain frill. So on my own farm, I got one rain. I think it was the 19th of June. And it was we were so dry, and I had wheat that went from knee high to over my waist within within a foot almost. It was just a line in the field. and you kind of look at that knee-high wheat and that was all subsoil moisture, 100% subsoil moisture. It changed at that line. And you looked at that knee-high wheat and said, oh, this is a disaster. Man, it still ran 80 bushel per acre. Now,
wow.
the tall wheat was 130, so it was way better. But still, man, like the variability is there, but the yields, I would not have expected to get 80 bushel out of that knee-high wheat.
Yeah, good surprises. It's better than the reverse, right? The reverse is worse, right?
Yeah.
Man, I think I got like a 65 bushel canola crop out there, and all of a sudden it's like 50 or 45. Those are surprises we don't like. And we've all experienced that, right? Where you're in the sprayer, you're putting some fungicide on, you're like, man, I got a lot of crop here. Then you get to the combining stage and you're just like, yeah, that's a disappointment. That's a way worse feeling.
Yeah, 100%. Welcome to the soybean crop. It often is like that, right? And we don't have enough off here yet to know, and it looks really good, but lots of times soybeans, they're just, wow, it looked awesome. Oh, sugar. It only yielded 58 bushels per acre.
Yeah. Canola is like that too. It steals your heart. It just like, it steals your heart. It's a heartbreaker. There's no other way to put it. Okay. Pete, what do you got on this week? What's happening?
So we're really hopeful, Shaun, that we can get to the field and combine soybeans and plant wheat. And, if that doesn't happen, I have a whole bunch of work to do for the Ontario Ag Conference. That's hard underway, planning for that right now. So that's chewing up a lot of time. Don't forget the agronomists tonight. I always like to be there. The podcast, but we're in harvest, Shaun. So whenever we're in harvest wheat planting season, Pete doesn't take on meetings to do, and no farmer's going to come anyway. So from that perspective, it's quiet, but from the workload perspective, it hasn't slowed down one bit.
Lots going on. Okay, Pete, thanks for joining us here this week on Agronomic Monday. Really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me, Shaun. We'll talk again.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after this.
Dedication. Watching the sunset over your crop is one of life's simple pleasures. The anticipation of it all. We know that feeling. Introducing our new Airflex NXT, our best honeybee header yet with the closest cut ever. Light, fast reacting, and infinitely adjustable. More yield, less time and work. Airflex NXT focuses on the future. What drives your next? Visit honeybee.ca or contact your nearest honeybee dealer.
The Advancing Women Conference, the National Leadership Conference for Women in Ag, is celebrating 10 years of bringing women in ag together. Whether you're a producer, student, entrepreneur, representative of grower association, or corporate agribusiness, invest in yourself in Niagara Falls on November 19th, 20th, and 21st. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
This year at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show in Woodstock, Ontario, Real Agriculture was on site. Bern Tobin of our team was there. All of our coverage is brought to you by Pride Seeds. You can go to our YouTube channel or to realagriculture.com and find all of that great coverage of the event. And we're continuing to put up videos this week and next and probably a little bit. There's a lot of stuff. So continue to check back and see that coverage of the show. One of the conversations that Bern Tobin had on site was talking to agronomist Pat Lynch. He's an agronomist, been very, very familiar in parts of Ontario. He's done a lot of work actually across Canada. And Pat talked about kind of the next evolution of broadcasting fertilizer. Here's their discussion.
Bernard Tobin here at Canada's Outdoor Farm Show. Today I'm at the fertilizer spreader demonstration where I'm catching up with independent agronomist Pat Lynch. First question for you, Pat. Why the focus this year on fertilizer spreading?
Okay, good question, Bernard. A lot of things have changed. Number one, we're putting on more fertilizer. Number two, we're doing things as variable rate. Number three, the farmers are farming more land. Traditionally in Ontario, we counted on the retail outlets to do the fertilizer spreading. The reality is now that those fertilizer spreading companies, the retail locations, they really can't handle the demand for all of the equipment they need and when they need it. So what farmers are doing is they are buying their own equipment. They can look after it better, they can manage it better, they can put the right people on it, and they can tweak it to the little things that they want to be doing.
What about the technology you're seeing out here today, Pat? What do you like? What do you dislike? How has it changed?
Okay, the technology is unbelievable what we can do. So we're going to variable rate fertilizing. With variable rate nitrogen, that's an obvious one. That's a no-brainer. That's fairly easy to do. But we're also doing variable rate phosphate and potash and even micronutrients. So these spreaders, they are sectional. So you could have 8 sections in a fertilizer spread. Each one of those sections, putting on a different rate of a fertilizer. And this goes back to the other reason why are farmers doing it. If you buy a blended product from a fertilizer retailer, they have to put it through their plant, they have to blend it, and there's a significant blending fee. If a farmer has his own spreader, he can apply one product by itself, variable rate in, and then the second product by itself, and then they'll save the cost of blending, plus be more fussy about when and how that fertilizer has gone on. The other, small little things, section control is great, but even, these spreaders now that can spread only 1/2 of the boom. So you're driving down your cornfield and the soybeans right beside it. You don't want any nitrogen on it. You drive right down beside it, and the other side, just the one side of the spreader's got it. You're not wasting fertilizer putting it onto the soybeans. The width of these things, like we're talking about doing 90 acres an hour with some of these fertilizer spreaders. So the reality is we saw again in spring 2023, suddenly we don't have enough time, and then it got too dry. So we want to get everything done as fast as we can. So farmer having their own fertilizer spreader, it's going to work. And the other thing, like some of these put on really small rates, and we can put on really low rates of the micronutrients to top up different parts of the field.
Final question for you. A farmer has decided they are going to broadcast. They've decided what spreader technology they're going to invest in. What else do they need to consider to get it right?
Okay, this is a matter of putting it all in together. So why are we broadcasting? We can't put on enough fertilizer with the planter or the drill or what. So it's common to put on maybe phosphate and potash for 2 or 3 years. Can't put that on the planter drill. We've got to broadcast. It's also common in Ontario to do tillage maybe after winter wheat once. So we broadcast on 2 or 3 years of phosphate and potash and work it in, and that's for the next 3 crops. So it's all part of a whole system. I take my winter wheat off, I broadcast the fertilizer, I plant a cover crop, and carry on. And the other part that's coming in is people like the SWOT map people. They are doing, and soil optics, they are doing various measurements in the ground to show where you're going to get the best use of the fertilizer. Fertilizer's gone up in price, farmers are paying more. There's a lot of variation in these fields, so farmers can put the right amount on the right place. There's a lot of economics involved in it, and it's part of the whole way that we are evolving.
Be very curious to get your opinions on this. Are you using a broadcast spreader for your fertilizer? Is that a practice that you've kind of parked and pushed to the side and going with other options that are out there? Or is this something you've kind of reincorporated back into your strategy? Pat kind of went through some of the advancements and some of the different ways to look at it and the reasons that some people are using this practice. I know when we're at Agritechnica coming up here in November, Europeans use a spreader a lot, right? Way more, I would think, here than we see in North America. So looking forward to see where some of those companies have made some of these big technological advancements to increase the accuracy and some of the precision of broadcast spreading. But, if you do have a thought on any of this, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. And, of course, you can find all of our coverage of Canada's Outdoor Farm Show, which is brought to you by Pride Seeds, by going to realagriculture.com or check out Real Agriculture's YouTube channel. Health and safety doesn't have to be complicated. Tune in to the new Farm Safety Roundup series coming soon to realagriculture.com. On the first episode, free resources and practical advice for harvest season and rural road safety. Make sure you check out that as well wherever you get your podcast. And it is brought to you by Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more here on RealAg Radio. Actually, we're going to check out your feedback. That's right, your feedback when we come back right after this.
At Brett Young, we focus on what's real. It's how we became Canada's largest independent seed company. That's why we're asking a real farmer, what do you think of BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid?
What's that?
BY6217TF, Brett Young's TrueFlex Canola Hybrid with Pod Defender shatter reduction technology and Defender-rated club root and blackleg resistance.
Good yield, yeah. Probably choose it again.
Thanks, Chris. Talk to your Brett Young retailer today to see for yourself. Brett Young, distinct by design.
What's next for your fields? At Pioneer, delivering industry-leading genetics drives everything we do. From the scientists in the lab to our local teams with boots on the ground, we are determined to get there first. Developing top-performing products, proven in more growing conditions than ever before. Pioneer. What's next happens here. Visit pioneer.com/Canada to learn more.
If you aren't putting the best in, how can you expect the best out? Your equipment's engine oil is a prime example. Only New Holland engine oil is engineered specifically to protect your New Holland equipment for the work ahead. Well, on the week ahead, for sure. Why not? Visit your local New Holland dealer to learn more. Okay, let's get into your feedback. Yes, always asking for it. And some of you hold back, and I'll run into you at a farm show or a conference. You're like, oh, I listen to the show all the time, and here's what I think about this topic. Well, you don't have to wait till you run into me at one of these conferences or shows. Why not do it in the spur of the moment? And I don't care if you're listening, say, to the podcast, and you're listening to a show from 3 months ago. You can always chip in with your thoughts, your commentary, and your opinions anytime that you like. Let's get to up first a conversation or a message that was left by Viren D'Souza, who is a listener from in Ontario. This is from the RealAg. This is related to the RealAg Issues panel going back a couple weeks ago, where I kind of went on a bit of a bent when it came to young people. And maybe the promises that we think are available to us in life and how that relates to hard work and perceptions of outcomes and things like that. Here's the message from Viren.
Hey, Shaun, it's Viren D'Souza calling from Peterborough, Ontario. Listened to your RealAg Issues panel there on Friday, and I'm going to have to side with my man from Altona, Manitoba, Kelvin here. If we're going to tell people that success or getting ahead in life isn't guaranteed when you work hard, then, the response back is always going to be, then why bother? And I think part of that, in recent times we've seen a have and have not. It's no surprise 10% of our GDP today is linked to real estate, and I'd say roughly half the people in Ontario anyways own where they live, and they'll have renting, and are increasingly seeing it hard to sort of get ahead. So I can totally understand where that sentiment is coming from. Most people under 40, home ownership is something they likely will never achieve. So naturally they're trying to achieve, some sort of wellness in life another way, and work isn't seen as the end all. The other thing I always think about is I grew up in a generation where corporations would lay you off regardless of how hard you worked. Not because they weren't making money, but because they weren't making enough money. And, a classic example that I look at today is RBC laying off 6,000 people. And, they're one of the biggest banks in Canada and probably have little to no risk of going bankrupt, yet they still have to lay off 6,000 people. I'm willing to bet John Stackhouse wasn't one of those people. Anyways, enjoy the show, and thanks a lot.
Hey, Viren, thanks a lot for the message. I think at the last point there in terms of layoffs when companies are making money, that's the pressure of Wall Street. That is not just your generation. That is, I think, generations going backwards and generations going forward, is that when you're dealing with a public company, there's a lot of pressure to boost earnings. One of the ways that you boost earnings is cutting costs. during times where margins are squeezed. I don't think we're going to be able to ever change that. And because if you do change it in the sense with a legislation or laws, then you're really encumbering and creating barriers for companies to want to do business in a country like Canada if it was that restrictive. But yeah, anyway, to the earlier point, I think in terms of this discussion around, is there a guarantee of success if you work hard? I don't know how you ever have that guarantee. And if someone's attitude is, well, if I'm not guaranteed based on to have success if I'm working hard, or whatever that success, whatever that actually looks like, for some people it's putting food on the table and having basic necessities. For others, it's having a Mercedes-Benz in the driveway or a souped-up Denali truck. Everybody has a different definition of it. But if your choice is, well, then why bother? I'm wondering if that's kind of the problem. And if we have too many people in the why bother, then we really, really have a challenge. Now, I think one of the things that governments are kind of dealing with, and for sure here in Canada, is how you increase what could we do to increase the probability that people are able to achieve that success and that dream that they're looking for, and there's different ways to go about it. Some people talk about universal income. Others would say, well, that you have to really want to enable and spur success by lowering taxes, reducing red tape, things like that. So depending on your political viewpoint, everybody's going to have a different way that they think government should go about solving problems like this. Got an email here from Clint. Now, Clint was listening to the September 22nd show where the RealAg Issues panel, Kelvin, myself, Lindsay, and Megan Murdoch talked about the potential merger between Viterra and Bunge, and farmers being quite concerned about that merger happening. So Clint says, hey, I just listened to the September 22nd show, and I think the panel missed a key reason that myself and other farmers are against the merger. There is a Bunge crush plant an hour north of my farm and a Viterra elevator an hour south. Bunge consistently pays more. Currently, it is 50 cents more a bushel. My fear is that after the merger, the price difference will be lost. Viterra will simply change the delivery point, and that extra value will be lost by the farmer. I agree that farm groups need to be making more noise about this. Actually, this was from Friday's show, not 2 weeks ago. So it was Jeff Nielsen that was on the issues panel. Clint, thank you so much for the email. And to that last point about farm groups, that's an interesting question. I had made the point that with the level of concern that farmers have about this merger, we haven't necessarily heard farm groups really getting, excited about or communicating the messages of growers about it. Now, I have had some people say this is not an area where farm groups would necessarily go out with an external an opinion and take a position on it. And that may be true. One of my rebuts to that is now, if they determine, if farm groups determine that it's going to create potentially less profitability for the farm gate, like say poor basis or less competition for grain bids, that's something that probably they would comment on. All the time with railways, farm groups comment about, railways not doing something or taking money out of the farmer's pocket when they don't need to. How is this any different? But we have not heard a lot of messaging around this. So I just find that interesting. I'm not saying they should all be up in arms. I just find it curious that there hasn't been a lot of communication about it. But great feedback here today. Really appreciate everybody stepping up and providing some thoughts on what is happening or things we've talked about here on the show. Continue to send me that feedback. shaney@realagriculture.com is the email address. Keep that feedback coming, everybody. Really do appreciate it. Remember, tonight, the agronomists, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, they're talking about soil sampling for nitrogen and phosphorus for farmers across the country. So please, please, please tune in for that. And, of course, if you can't make it, you can always download the podcast. Continue to tell your friends about this show as we try to make this community larger and larger and continue to grow it. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.